2026 is shaping up to be yet another banger year for game releases, with a mix of both old and fresh faces making their presence known. But when it comes to the old breed, there's one franchise making its return with a brand new title that has everybody talking.
You there, Leon?
What? Yeah.
Resident Evil 9 alongside Grand Theft Auto 6 are definitely going to be two of the most talked about games of the year. That is, if GTA 6 still releases this year. But anyways, with Requiem's announcement in mind, I decided that in my personal time I would go back and dedicate some time to the Resident Evil series in order to catch up and get myself hyped. For those who have been living under a rock, Resident Evil is a horror video game series developed and published by a Japanese video game company called Capcom. Over the years, it's grown into what is arguably the most recognizable horror franchise in gaming history, with a staggering 11 mainline entries, numerous spin-offs, 7 live-action films, along with comics, novels, merchandise, and more, becoming a massive multimedia powerhouse. The series is celebrated for its contributions to popularizing the survival horror genre in gaming, as well as being the main force behind the revival of zombies in popular culture as a whole. And while it wasn't even the first horror game of all time made in that style, that credit actually goes to 3D Monster Maze, Resident Evil's creation effectively made survival horror and horror games in general a dominant part of the video game industry for years to come. And despite some hiccups in the late 2000s, it's been the forerunner of the genre ever since, with so many games even today using it as a blueprint for how to create the perfect horror experience. I'm gonna be honest, I was kinda on the fence about making this video for a few reasons. For one, horror is definitely not my strong suit at all. Growing up, I stayed far away from most of this stuff, with the only exception of course being Five Nights at Freddy's. That was until I played Resident Evil 4 for the first time in 2020 and my mind was blown. Unlike earlier entries, RE4 leaned much more into action instead of all-out horror, which allowed me to ease my way into the franchise, and from then on, I was a RE fan. This, alongside watching endless episodes of the kill count on YouTube, has led to the situation now where I often find myself giving horror media more and more of a chance in my life. The other reason I hesitated is because, like with a lot of already talked about games on YouTube, I felt like I wouldn't be able to add anything to the conversation, especially with people like the Sphere Hunter on YouTube already crafting massively thoughtful love letters to the series already via reviews, retrospectives, and other stuff. But with both Requiem's release and the series' 30th anniversary on the horizon, and me already going through the franchise in my spare time to catch up, I decided, why not use this moment to take a break from Metal Gear and put something together. Just note that while Metal Gear will remain my priority for the foreseeable future, I will be sprinkling in other projects here and there for the sake of variety. With all that out of the way, let's begin. Like many legendary franchises, Resident Evil actually comes from very humble origins. The story begins in 1989 when Capcom veteran Tokyo Fujiwara released his latest creation, a horror RPG called Sweet Home. This game was actually an adaptation of a Japanese horror film of the same name, and it revolves around a film crew exploring a haunted mansion, with their goal being to restore the lost artwork inside. But instead, they find themselves confronted by the vengeful spirit that haunts the grounds. One by one, the crew is attacked as they try to escape, and in order to survive, they have to confront the spirit head on. Whilst the movie was being made, Capcom got the rights to develop a game version for the Famicom, which is the Japanese version of the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES in the West. Like I said earlier, Fujiwara would be put in charge of the project, and a lot of the design choices implemented here will go on to greatly influence Resident Evil, with the two standouts being stuff like puzzle solving and survival elements. Despite being limited to a Japan-only release, the Sweet Home series has gained a massive worldwide cult following in recent times, as people grew to greatly appreciate the groundwork it made for horror gaming going forward. Fast forwarding a few years to the rise of the 5th generation of game consoles being led by Sony's brand new PlayStation console. Fujiwara, after seeing what this new powerful technology was capable of, quickly pitched the idea to Capcom for the idea of a remake of Sweet Home. Capcom agreed and development began in 1993. Fujiwara would soon bring in the most recognized face of the franchise on the development side of things, Shinji Mikami, who was brought in as the game's director. Fujiwara adored Mikami for literally the sole reason of him being a complete scaredy cat, which in his mind was perfect because he would be able to tell what was and wasn't scary. And of course, it's impossible to do an RE1 video on YouTube and not mention the fact that Mikami's portfolio up until that point mostly consisted of kid-friendly games, stuff like Goof Troop and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which really puts into perspective Fujiwara's decision to recruit him. The game's development for the most part was smooth sailing. That was until Capcom lost the rights to Sweet Home, which forced them to rework a lot of the game's characters, locations, and story to be more original while still maintaining the core design elements from Sweet Home. However, it's important to mention that Sweet Home wasn't Resident Evil's only inspiration, as there were countless others from the 80s and the 90s, most notably 1992's Alone in the Dark, which was a 3D survival horror game that used fixed camera angles, an idea that Resident Evil would take to heart as well. Finally, in 1996, Capcom would release Resident Evil for the PlayStation, and for those who are unaware, in Japan the series is actually called Biohazard. Now, the reason why it was changed overseas was because Capcom was informed by their North American office that, due to various reasons, the Biohazard name couldn't be copyrighted and claimed in the United States. So Capcom then had a company-wide contest to pick the new name, and the one they chose is absolute perfection.
Resident Evil.
Now, before getting into the story analysis part of the video, I just want to note that for this video we will, for the first part, be reviewing the 1996 original version of RE1 via its PC port on GOG. And as always, later on we'll be checking out all other ports available to see which one is best for you guys, with one in particular that we're going to be taking a deeper look at alongside the original. In July of 1998, a Midwestern industrial town called Raccoon City is rocked by a series of cannibalistic style murders happening in the forested mountains surrounding the city. The Raccoon City Police Department then responds by sending in Bravo Team, a division of their elite Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS, to investigate. But not long after deployment, all of Bravo Team goes missing. To figure out what happened to them, Alpha Team is sent in both to find their missing comrades and to uncover the truth behind the murders. The intro of the original game features a very cringy FMV cutscene.
Hey! Come here!
Yeah, this intro is definitely infamous for its very questionable direction, but honestly, it doesn't take away from the game at all. I still love it. While researching though, I did find two fun facts worth sharing. First is that the original Japanese version of the intro has more gore than its North American counterpart, and it's also in full color. The reason for the change was that the developers thought Western players wouldn't be able to handle it, so it was toned down and made black and white, which is hilarious because in some respects the black and white filter could actually make it more scary. Even Mikami himself agreed with this. Secondly, all the actors present here were unknown local hires whose identities remained a mystery for years, until quite recently where most of them came forward in interviews online, the only exception being Jill's actress, who proved much more harder to track down. Getting back on track, after arriving, Alpha Team discovers the wreck of Bravo Team's helicopter alongside its pilot, who's been mutilated beyond belief. And not even 5 seconds in, they're attacked by a group of zombie dogs, which ends with the death of team member Joseph Frost. This spooks Brad Vickers, Alpha Team's helicopter pilot, who takes off in a panic, leaving the entire team behind. With no other options, the survivors book it towards a nearby mansion for safety, and this is where the game begins. But before I dive into the story, let's meet our cast in glorious 90s action movie style.
Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Rebecca Chambers,
Women.
Albert Wesker, Resident Evil.
Another key detail about RE1's plot is that it is split into two campaigns, one from the perspective of Chris Redfield and the other from Jill Valentine. While the core story remains largely the same, there are differences in how certain events play out, as well as the characters that they'll encounter, something I'll get into a bit later. After making it inside, the STARS members decide to continue their investigation and make the decision to split up to cover more ground. And let's just say it doesn't take long for them to notice that something here is amiss. The entirety of the Spencer Mansion and its surrounding areas are crawling with the undead and other nightmarish creatures. What follows is a fight for survival as they slowly uncover the truth while searching for a way out. The journey through the mansion is filled with scares around almost every corner, and also a lot of tragedy since we also come across the members of Bravo Team, most of whom have fallen victim to the mansion's horrors. Further exploration reveals that the monsters here are actually the byproduct of some type of viral outbreak caused by experiments that were being performed nearby. Things escalate when we encounter Bravo Team's captain, Enrico Marini. He warns that there's a traitor in their ranks who's connected to the viral outbreak, but before he can reveal who it is, he's assassinated by someone lurking in the shadows behind us. Eventually, the investigation leads to a hidden underground laboratory beneath the mansion where the game's final act plays out, and it's here where everything is revealed. First, the viral outbreak is traced back to a pharmaceutical company called Umbrella, which has been secretly developing bioweapons for military use. Secondly, it's also revealed that the STARS members being sent there was no accident. The event at the mansion was orchestrated as a live test to see how their experiments performed in real-life combat scenarios. And thirdly, it's here where the traitor finally reveals himself, and it turns out to be Alpha Team Leader Albert Wesker, who has been secretly working with Umbrella the entire time, manipulating events behind the scenes to get our heroes right where he wants them. Wesker shows off the crown jewel of Umbrella's experiment, a superhuman/bioweapon called the Tyrant, and unleashes it on our heroes who thankfully manage to subdue it. A self-destruction timer is set off, forcing the survivors to rush to a heliport where they can finally meet back up with Brad. But before they can do that, they have to face off with the Tyrant one last time, and after some assistance from Brad himself, it's hasta la vista, baby. With the Tyrant finally dealt with, the day is officially saved as our heroes make their escape via helicopter with the mansion blowing up behind them, thus ending Resident Evil. All things considered, it's a fairly simple plot, especially by today's standards. But like a lot of first entries in the series, its main job is to set things up for the rest of the franchise, and RE1 does a very good job at that. A story about badass soldiers going to stop a zombie apocalypse while carrying the air of mystery throughout, capped off with a simple but memorable twist that ties it all together nicely. Honestly, the only mark against RE1's story is also the one thing I hold against the game as a whole, and that comes down to the presentation. Now keep in mind, this is one of those cases where it's more about it being a product of its time rather than a true flaw. This was still 2 years before Metal Gear Solid came along and kicked off the whole idea of Hollywood-style storytelling in video games. The voice acting here is just as bad as everyone online says it is.
Whoa! What is it?
What? Oh no!
That's right. This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant. Chris? Stop it.
Oh, Jill, this house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
This is a big problem because the line deliveries don't match the seriousness of the situation, like at all. The biggest culprit here is Barry Burton. Every time this guy was on screen, I was guaranteed to laugh. Seriously, this guy just fucking tickles me pink, bro.
What is this? What is it?
Maybe it's Chris. Now, Jill, can you go?
I'm going with you. Chris is our old partner, you know. Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Hey, what's going on?
Now I've done it.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're...
Another issue with the story is that we really don't get a strong sense of who these characters are or what they're even like. Most of the cutscenes in the game can be summed up to them just reacting to things, rather than really taking it in or showing any critical thought whatsoever. The only real world building comes from the files and notes scattered around the mansion. I love these things, by the way. They're such an extremely nice touch. Not only do they do a good job adding to the mystery and horror of the story, but they also do an amazing job at setting up atmosphere. The thing is though, is that these are meant more for the player to experience than for the characters themselves. One of the coolest things about RE1's story is its branching paths. Like I mentioned earlier, you can play the story either as Chris or Jill, and who you pick changes how the story plays out. For example, in Jill's version of events, she's accompanied by Barry, who will occasionally pop in to help out in certain events. In Chris's campaign, he crosses paths with Rebecca Chambers, the only surviving member of Bravo Team who's a medic. She can also heal Chris's wounds in certain parts of the story, which makes her very helpful. Rebecca is nice, but in this game she's kind of a letdown. She's not as interesting as she is later on in the series, mainly because you don't run into her as much as Jill runs into Barry, which is kind of lame, although that might be related to Chris's overall gameplay. More on that in a bit. One thing that honest to God surprised me about RE1's story is that no one has guaranteed plot armor. Depending on your actions, most characters can die in either campaign, which changes which of the multiple endings you get. While there are technically 7 endings in total, there's only 2 that are canon when connected to each other. In Jill's canon ending, she, Chris, and Barry survive, and in Chris's ending, he, Jill, and Rebecca survive. The rest are variations of these outcomes, Jill escaping alone, Chris escaping alone, Jill with Barry, or Chris with Rebecca. This, alongside the gameplay choices that we'll discuss later, are amazing at offering high replay value, which is only ever a good thing in a game. Speaking of endings, let's talk about Albert Wesker. In Jill's story, we learn that Wesker was manipulating Barry by threatening his family, forcing him to betray his teammates. Thankfully, Barry redeems himself by knocking out Wesker at a crucial moment, which allows the team to escape, but also gives Wesker the chance to slip away off screen. On the other hand, Chris's version of events play out very differently. Instead of escaping, Wesker is attacked by the tyrant and seemingly killed while the others make their escape. Now, at the time, Capcom wasn't sure if Resident Evil would turn into a full franchise, so Wesker was originally meant to die here. But, as later revealed in Resident Evil Code Veronica, Wesker secretly injected himself with something called the G virus beforehand that allowed him to survive. And if you're wondering what the hell that even is, then you'll have to wait until the RE2 review for that one. But overall, Resident Evil's story, although flawed by the times, is still effective in what it sets out to do. It creates tension, gives you a reason to push forward, and builds a world that will go on to spawn one of gaming's biggest franchises. The mystery of the mansion, the survival of the STARS units, the deep lore, it's all so iconic, even if it is a bit campy and rough around the edges today.
It's me, Chris.
Is that you, Rebecca?
But to be honest, I feel like a lot of Resident Evil's legacy is carried more by its gameplay and how it changed the landscape of gaming as a whole, so let's take a look. Resident Evil, of course, is a third-person survival horror game where your main objective is to fight, survive, solve puzzles, and make your escape to safety. But the main thing that made RE1 the start is its emphasis on the survival element. Unlike a lot of other horror games at the time, RE1 didn't make you some invincible beast that can conquer everything. Instead, the game focuses on making the player vulnerable at all times. This design choice shows up in a lot of ways, but the biggest one is resource management. Resources in RE1 range from healing items, ammo for your weapon, and even single-use ink ribbons which allow you to save your progress at typewriters scattered across the map. As you might correctly guess, these items aren't in full abundance, meaning you'll have to think carefully about how and when you use them, as overuse can lead to dire consequences, like running into a boss's room with no ammo, or playing for hours without the ability to save your game. Then there's the controls. Resident Evil's control scheme, also known as tank controls, is notorious for stumping new players and definitely takes some time to get used to. Unlike in other games where you move in relation to the camera, RE1 works very differently. When you move forward, your character will always move in the direction they're facing regardless of the camera's angle. Back moves you backwards, and left or right rotates your character in that direction, similar to how a tank moves in real life, hence the name. Like a lot of people, when I first played Resident Evil, I hated these controls because they made it feel impossible to do pretty much anything. Combine this with the fixed camera angles that only shift when you hit certain parts of the map, by the way, and it's hella disorienting. But here's the thing, if you stick with it and push through, it will quickly become second nature, and soon enough you'll be moving around no problem. And honestly, I think this setup is actually intentional, because it adds so much to the horror atmosphere by creating fear and panic. There will be plenty of times where you enter a room and can't see where any of the enemies are, forcing you to rely on sound, or you'll stumble into an enemy unexpectedly for a mini jump scare. In fact, RE1 is often credited as the first video game to feature jump scares. And while that's not true, that honor actually goes to rescue on Fetralis, I don't know how to say that. Given the game's legacy, it's easy to see why it gets that credit. The enemies in RE1 are another reason why it's so important to get a handle on everything quickly, because they don't pull any punches. You've got your classic Romero-style zombies, which are slow but dangerous in groups or in tight corridors. Then there are zombie dogs who are fast and agile, hunters who are a real bitch to deal with, especially when playing as Chris, along with giant snakes, spiders, etc. These things can take a ton of bullets just to put down. Even basic zombies can still surprise you, as sometimes they'll get right back up after a couple of shots, or they'll even bite your legs if you try to walk past them. This ties right back into the survival and resource management aspect. Often it's smarter to avoid enemies when you can, conserving ammo and health for when you really need it. Thankfully, when used right, the weapons pack a serious punch, from basic pistols and shotguns to heavy firepower like flamethrowers and even grenade launchers. The catch is that combat, including boss fights, is still very tough, especially when you're still learning the controls. Even then, because there's no full free movement, some enemies cannot pace you, making them a pain to hit. That's where the healing items come in. They're extremely valuable and come in two forms, both of which have gone on to become series staples: herbs and first aid spray. The first aid spray can fully heal you in one go, while herbs often require either multiple or mixing of them for a full heal. There are three versions. Green is your standard health herb, blue cures poison, mostly from snakes, and red when combined boosts the effects of the other two. But RE1 isn't just about combat and survival. Exploration and puzzle solving is also a part of the gameplay loop too. When the game begins, large sections of the Spencer Mansion are locked off, requiring you to track down keys needed to progress. Those locked rooms often hide more puzzles, items, or weapons needed to progress even further. The puzzles here are pretty cool. They're not really hard by any stretch of the imagination, and if you mess up on any of them, they could just simply be reset by leaving and re-entering the room, but they work as fun little set pieces to help break up the action. Some are simple, like pushing a statue onto a pressure plate to open a door, while others will require a little bit more thought, like figuring out a keypad code by looking at items arranged in a certain way in a different room. On top of that, there's the inspect feature in the inventory screen. Many items have hidden details that can only reveal themselves when you rotate or examine them closely, like opening up a book to find a hidden medallion inside. This is, in my opinion, one of the series' most underrated features, as it really allows you to put yourself in the shoes of the characters, making you feel like you're piecing together clues and investigating the Spencer Mansion instead of just passively watching everything unfold. Be warned though, while enemies usually don't bother you in puzzle rooms, the mansion itself can still kill you. Solve something incorrectly, you might trigger a deadly trap instead. Another one of RE's most defining features is how inventory is managed. Unlike a lot of other games, you can't carry everything all at once. Instead, you've got limited inventory slots that you need to manage wisely. Alongside tank controls, this is another gameplay mechanic that new players will always find frustrating. Luckily, the safe rooms dotted around the mansion not only give you a chance to breathe and save your game, they also house the universal item box. These chests let you store items for later use, and the best part is that they're all connected. Drop something in one chest and you can pick it back up from another chest across the map, kinda like how ender chests work in Minecraft. While this mechanic is great for cutting down on backtracking, it doesn't eliminate it all completely. With how many items you'll be collecting over the course of the game, it's still very easy to max out all your slots, especially when playing as Chris. Speaking of which, let's finally talk about the characters. Jill is basically easy mode. She has 8 inventory slots, gets a lockpick from Barry that lets her bypass a lot of the locked doors and compartments to find more items, and Barry himself helps her out on multiple occasions throughout the story. Plus, she's the only one who gets the grenade launcher, an insanely powerful weapon with solid ammo drops if you manage it right. For the most part, Jill's campaign is smooth sailing, and everybody, myself included, agrees that this is where you start, especially if this is your very first time playing the game. It allows you to learn how the game works in a somewhat relaxed environment without bombarding you unnecessarily, while also offering just enough challenge to avoid straight up hand-holding you. Chris, on the other hand, is definitely hard mode. He only has 6 inventory slots, gets no grenade launcher, and Rebecca, while helpful, doesn't show up as often as Barry does. He also doesn't have a lockpick. Instead, Chris needs to get more of the mansion keys for main doors and mini keys just to open up small compartments. This leads to way more backtracking than with Jill. No joke, if I showed you guys my raw Chris gameplay footage, almost half of it would just be me running back and forth between safe rooms and other rooms just to shuffle items. The smaller inventory and no lockpick means that situations that Jill breathes through now will require a few extra steps. A prime example is the shotgun situation. There's a room in the mansion where you can grab the shotgun, but taking it triggers a trap on the way out. To get around it, you have to grab a dummy shotgun from across the mansion to put in its place. But when you're playing as Jill, you can just simply wait for Barry to come and save you. Chris's campaign is a nice challenge in my opinion, as long as you beat Jill's story first. Just keep in mind you won't be straight shooting through areas like Jill does. There is one advantage that Chris has over Jill, and that's her health stats, as Chris can take more punishment than Jill, and that's sort of way to balance things out considering you'll be on your own for the most part. Tying back to the story section for one last bit, RE1 will also occasionally give you choices that can change how the story unfolds, which leads to one of the many endings like I said earlier. There's a semi-hidden action set piece where Rebecca is attacked by a hunter, and if you don't act fast enough, she can actually be killed. If you don't wait on Barry to fetch another rope after fighting Jan for the second time, this leads to his death near the end of the game. Again, while it's nice to have choices in a video game, I don't think that any of these choices are worth seeing. At all, especially when we get to the remake. The final point to talk about when it comes to the gameplay is that there's 2 brief moments where you get to play as Rebecca herself in the campaign. First is when Chris is poisoned after fighting Jan, the giant snake, and you have to retrieve some serum to cure him. The second is when she's making V-Jolt for the battle against Plant 42. And while it's nice to step into her shoes for a bit, gameplay wise there's nothing really new going on, but it is a nice change of pace at the very least. But when it's all said and done and both campaigns are completed, you've officially beaten Resident Evil. And by the way, I gotta shout out the little vacation style photos of Chris and Jill you get at the end. Jill's pic made me laugh out loud, not gonna lie, but Chris's? Prime wallpaper material right here. I love it. I also love the fact that upon completing either campaign, you gain access to the closet, which houses alternative costumes for Chris and Jill, which all look amazing. Graphically, it's okay for PS1 standards. The use of pre-rendered backgrounds was never really my favorite graphical trick used around this time, but the environments are still super detailed, and everything ties together naturally to sell the atmosphere of the mansion. And of course, like so many legendary games, RE1's musical score is perfect. It nails the tension, the uneasiness, and sometimes gives you a false sense of comfort before pulling the rug out from under you. My favorite track has to be the Safe Room theme. Just like Celestial from Metal Gear Solid, I often use it to help me fall asleep with its relaxed sounds. Resident Evil, while slightly dated in terms of game design, was and still is an amazing triumph in the world of survival horror. And while it may not keep me up at night compared to something like Five Nights at Freddy's or Dead Space, back in 1996, RE1 came in at just the right time to completely change the industry, giving us many of the horror experiences we enjoy today. And contrary to what you might think, it'll actually surprise you to learn that before release, Capcom had very little faith in RE1's success, to the point where they even tossed in inexperienced new hires onto the project, expecting it to fail. But of course, things turned out to be the complete opposite to what Capcom expected, as upon release, Resident Evil received universal critical acclaim, sold over 5 million copies worldwide, and became one of the key titles that launched Sony's debut console into the stratosphere. But we're not done just yet. In December of 1996, Capcom would strike again with the first of many re-releases of the original game, starting with the original PC port. Now, from what I've researched, the original PC port of Resident Evil was rough. Even back on its original Windows 95 release, it suffered from performance quirks and other technical issues typical of 5th generation PC ports at the time, and over time it was effectively abandoned. I'm so glad we've gotten past disastrous launches in the video game industry, right guys? Oh. Thankfully, fans have stepped in over the years, and the community has created numerous patches and tweaks that kept the game playable, most notably the classic Rebirth mod, which fixes long-standing technical issues and lets the original PC release run properly on modern hardware. On top of that, there's also the Seamless HD project, which uses AI upscaling to enhance the pre-rendered backgrounds and textures, making them look way cleaner, and honestly, it looks pretty damn good. So good, in fact, that I kinda regret not recording the entire game like this. No exaggeration, if I were doing a full Resident Evil 1 Let's Play or a live stream or revisiting for a future review, this is absolutely the version I'd use. It just makes the picture really pop. That said, if you want to just play classic Resident Evil on PC out of the box, the best option today is the GOG version. Released in 2024 as part of GOG's preservation efforts, this version is based on the original vanilla PC release, now in a fully playable state. Not only does it run amazingly well, but it also has good modern controller support, allows for full button remapping, and because it's GOG, it's completely DRM free. No launcher, no online checks. You install it, you play it, and you own it. In my opinion, this is the best way to play the original game, and for those who are wondering, the classic Rebirth and Seamless HD mods also do work on the GOG version, and there's even versions for RE2 and 3 as well. Just make sure that before you install the game in question to change to the Japanese version, as it only works on there. Links for everything you need will be provided in the description below. Now, if you're in the mood for something more interesting, there are still other versions worth talking about. The first major console re-release arrived in 1997 with Resident Evil Director's Cut. Compared to the original release, this version introduces several changes that make it a huge step up from the original, even for veteran players. This version introduces auto-aim to the series, making combat easier. 3 difficulty options have also been added: Standard, Training, and Advanced. Standard and Training are both pretty straightforward. Standard plays exactly like the 1996 original, while Training does the same thing but makes the experience way easier by making items more abundant, giving Chris and Jill more health alongside making enemies weaker. Advanced mode though is a completely different affair altogether, to the point where it almost feels like a completely different game. First off, both Chris and Jill have very low health stats, enemies hit harder, and items are way more scarce than ever. On top of that, while the mansion's general layout has stayed the same, many aspects of the game's design and progression have changed. For one, many of the camera angles are now different from what they once were, like here in the main hall. Key items have also shifted locations, like here, where the dummy shotgun can now be found in one of the safe rooms instead of the closet. Enemies now spawn in rooms they didn't before, and some of them will actually move faster when attacking. There's new scripted events to throw off veteran players, like the mini forest encounter. Thankfully, to even the playing field, Chris and Jill have both been given a much more powerful version of the Beretta, which now sometimes has the ability to auto headshot enemies with one bullet, similar to that of the shotgun. Advanced mode is perfect for diehard veterans who want to test their skills and recapture that feeling of playing the game for the first time all over again. But I have to warn that this is really only for those type of players who have the original game memorized to the letter. The difficulty here does not fuck around. Even just trying to capture the necessary footage to showcase it was a pain in the ass. However, if you still want to test your skills and go for the gold, there is a small trick you can do. When highlighting the difficulty on the title menu, hold right on the D-pad until it turns green. This will cause ammo pickups to double. Lastly, RE1 Director's Cut is the first version of the game to start the tradition of having version exclusive costumes. When playing in advanced mode and only in advanced mode, Chris and Jill will start the game with 2 new costumes. Rebecca can also be seen wearing a new costume later when you meet her as well. The Director's Cut of RE1 is an amazing upgrade that really adds a lot to the already solid foundation, a foundation that would be built upon even further yet another year later. In 1998, to help players cope with Resident Evil 2's release being delayed, Capcom made the Director's Cut DualShock Edition. This version is largely identical to its 1997 counterpart, but with 4 key changes. As the title suggests, the game now supports the DualShock 1 PS1 controller with its dual analog sticks, allowing for easier control. You can also customize the controls to your liking and even enable vibration, making the game much more immersive. The other major change? The soundtrack was completely reworked, and honestly, it's terrible. For reference, this is what the original game sounded like. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, apparently not, because this is what DCSC went with. Now you're probably wondering why the fuck they replaced a perfectly fine soundtrack with the musical equivalent of the 6-7 meme. Well, believe it or not, it's actually a pretty interesting story that we don't have time to cover here, but I will leave a video link in the description below to a Justin Wang video where he covers this topic in great detail. It's a great watch, so make sure to check it out when you can. Now, to be fair, the entire soundtrack isn't a total train wreck, but I always find myself questioning what was the point of these changes, especially when, again, the original soundtrack was fine enough as is. Well, if you want to experience DCSC this time with good music, you're in luck. Just note in advance, this version requires you to either use emulation like on DuckStation or a modded PS1, PS2, or PS3. It's a fan ROM hack called the Ultimate Director's Cut DualShock Edition, which takes the 1998 version and fixes it, mainly improving the soundtrack and numerous other things. And yeah, it's just yet another amazing fan restoration project. So if you like emulation and all the bonuses that come with that, like high resolutions, frame rate, and even a fix that changes the PS1 polygon wobbling effect, then this is the version for you. And finally, we arrive at the last 2 major original re-releases, and I definitely saved the most interesting for last. For the first one, we need to fast forward to the year 2006 with the release of Resident Evil Deadly Silence for the Nintendo DS. This game was created to celebrate the series' then 10th anniversary, and this definitely was an interesting way to celebrate. Keep in mind that this is actually one of the first ever M-rated DS games to be released, which was a huge thing back then. Nowadays, people really don't care about M-rated games on Nintendo consoles, but back in the late 2000s, especially during the GameCube, Wii, and DS era, Nintendo was still largely seen as a family-friendly brand. To start off, the game has two game modes this time around, Rebirth and Classic. Classic plays of course just like the original game, but the real hallmark of this port is the Rebirth mode. Rebirth plays similarly to that of Advanced difficulty in the Director's Cut version, where the difficulty is upped a bit. But the real changes here are how this mode takes more advantage of the DS's features, such as blowing in the microphone, which here simulates doing mouth-to-mouth on Richard, and performing various new tasks using the touchscreen. Sometimes there are situations where when you enter a room, the game begins a knife fight minigame where you must swipe at the screen like a knife to ward off incoming enemies using the DS stylus. A whole bunch of new puzzles have been added alongside the original ones that have either been completely reworked or redesigned to include the touchscreen as well. This port also includes some upgrades in gameplay, such as the door animation skip and the knife being its own separate button like in RE4. Graphically speaking, there's not much different going on here. The models themselves are slightly more advanced than their PS1 counterparts, and the pre-rendered backgrounds are much more saturated, but that's about it. But as with tradition, like with every new version of RE1, the DS version also has its own set of costumes, which is always a plus. Deadly Silence, in my opinion, is a very fun way to experience the original game, especially with the inclusion of a multiplayer mode, which judging from the videos I've seen of it, it looks pretty fun. There's just two things that bother me about Deadly Silence, and one is much more egregious than the other. First, unlike most DS games where the top screen is for the gameplay and the bottom screen is for menus and stuff like that, this game is the complete opposite, which isn't a major problem all things considered, it's just something I had to get used to. Secondly, in terms of accessibility, it can be a bit difficult to get as copies of it are very hard to come by, especially if you want it in the case as well. But of course you can always take the emulation route by using Melon DS. Just like DuckStation, Melon DS runs everything perfectly, on top of having excellent customization options when it comes to display, screen sizes, orientation, and more. The software even allows use of the DS's microphone, camera, and touchscreen by using your real-life mic, webcam, and mouse for the touchscreen. Just keep in mind, with this being a DS game, it's meant to be displayed on a smaller screen, so when the display settings are boosted to the max, some graphical anomalies can be seen, but it's nothing to write home about. All in all, an excellent port all around, and one that I'll definitely be playing on future trips. Melon DS is nice, but for most DS and 3DS games, I like playing on the original hardware. It's just more fun for me that way personally. But when it comes to interesting as hell video game ports, this last one tops them all. Resident Evil on the Game Boy Color. Here's the story behind this one. In the late 90s, a British game developer called HotGen Studios were given permission by Capcom to port the entirety of RE1 to the Nintendo Game Boy Color. Initially scheduled for a release in the fall of 1999, the project was delayed and ultimately cancelled in 2000 to be replaced by a ground-up standalone game later called Resident Evil Gaiden. This may have to do with the fact that despite some headway being made, technical limitations made releasing it unsustainable. Now, despite that, the game at the time of cancellation was around about 85 to 95% done, and this became more apparent when the game's ROM was published online and people got their hands on it. First off, I just want to say, above all else, credit to the developers for even attempting something like this. This is hands down one of the most ambitious ports I've ever played so far on the channel. I'm not going to try to seriously critique it because, well, look at it. But what I will say is that it plays kind of well. The controls are a bit hard to manage, as moving around in a pseudo 3D space like this is almost never easy to work with. All the cutscenes are intact, but this time they're just plain text boxes, which is understandable. The combat and puzzles are both very iffy because, again, these type of graphics don't exactly mesh well with the gameplay style of the original. And overall, it's just a fairly fascinating way to experience this classic, but obviously not the best way, unless you're a diehard fan or just into the novelty aspect of it. Alright, so we finally made it through all of that. It's a lot. The only other ways to play the original, in my opinion, is of course through backwards compatibility on PS2 and PS3, and since I last checked, the game is still on the PS3 store, so if you bought it there, it can also be played on PSP and Vita as well. But to put a nail in the coffin, for me the top ways are GOG, DuckStation emulation, and Deadly Silence via emulation. Now it's time for us to talk about the magnum opus itself. It's seen by many people to be the king of all video game remakes, and honestly, it's one of the reasons why this video exists in the first place, because I wanted another reason to play it again. It's so good.
Resident Evil.
But before we get into this game, let's first go over some context. At the beginning of the 6th generation, Nintendo was still licking its wounds after the Nintendo 64 lost out big time to the original PlayStation. The N64 had sold over 32 million units in its lifetime, which was good, but compared to the PS1's 101 million units, it was a drop in the bucket. Because of this, Nintendo would switch up their strategy with their next weapon of choice, that being the Nintendo GameCube, and decided to fight back by winning back some of the third-party support that they had lost. One of the companies that Nintendo would of course end up striking a deal with is Capcom, and the deal confirmed that the next couple of RE releases would be GameCube exclusives, the first of which was to be a full remake of Resident Evil 1. Once again, Shinji Mikami was in the director's chair and was extremely enthusiastic about the project, since he believed that RE1 was the only game in the original trilogy that had aged the worst. But now, with the power of the GameCube at their disposal, he and the development team could now fully realize their vision. Development began in 2001, and the early stages mostly consisted of studying the GameCube's hardware to see what worked and what didn't, alongside some systems from Nintendo themselves. And let's just say it didn't take long for the team to realize just how powerful the system was in comparison to the original PlayStation. Early builds of the game showcased it using full 3D environments like the ones used in Code Veronica, but the development team, in their quest to make everything so detailed, ended up making the backgrounds too much for the GameCube to handle, so they scaled back to using pre-rendered versions of them instead. This ended up being a good call, as it allowed them to make other areas of the game very detailed as well, while saving processing power for other things. The 3D models in Remake are honestly some of the best 3D models of the 6th generation, with a lot of them still holding up well even to this day. This is especially true when it comes to the human models, with many of them for the first time being based on real-life models and celebrities, with the standout of course being Canadian actress Julia Voff, who gives us the definitive version of Jill Valentine. Mikami and his team also aimed for a stronger sense of realism this time around, not just in the characters but in the environment itself. The pre-rendered backgrounds weren't just static images like before, they also layered in subtle animated effects like drifting dust, flickering candlelight, flowing water, and swaying branches using video overlays and particle effects to make the game feel more alive. And for the characters themselves, the team made extensive use of motion capture, giving their movements a weight and naturalism the original game simply couldn't achieve. Now, while that all sounds hella interesting, and don't get me wrong, it still is, that's actually not the craziest part of Remake's development. The original plan for the game was to only give it a facelift graphically and not change anything in terms of gameplay. It was only towards the tail end of development that they decided to change that and revamp many parts of the gameplay to make the experience better. The reason behind this is because Mikami wanted the game to be a fresh experience for both new and old fans alike, and if the game was a simple copy and paste job, it would be too predictable. While this ended up being another great call for Mikami, this unfortunately led to severe amounts of crunch on the developer side of things. It's often been reported that people working on the game were in the office for over 2 months straight, plus overtime with no days off to meet the game's rapidly approaching release, which is insane. Thankfully, all their hard work would pay off, and after only 1 year of development, Resident Evil Remake would be released on the GameCube in the spring of 2002. But for this video, we're going to take a look at the 2015 HD re-release of the game on PC via Steam.
Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone, situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we are searching for the helicopter of our compatriots, Bravo Team, who disappeared during the middle of their mission.
Found it yet?
No, not yet, Brad. Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. There are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten. The Bravo Team was sent in to investigate, but we lost contact.
Look, Chris.
Bravo Team's helicopter was a derelict. Save for the remaining body of Kevin. We continued our search for the other members, and it turned into a nightmare.
The story here is almost the exact same as in the original and follows the same basic structure. You're once again playing as STARS members Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, fighting to survive a viral outbreak inside the Spencer Mansion in the Arklay Mountains surrounding Raccoon City, with the ultimate goal of course being to once again survive and escape. The only major narrative addition is the inclusion of the Trevor family, which is something we'll dive deeper into later. Beyond that, all other changes mostly come in the form of subtle references that help the game reconnect back to the wider canon, like mentioning William Birkin from Resident Evil 2 and the Nemesis Parasite from Resident Evil 3. Now, it doesn't take a genius to see that this game looks leaps and bounds better than any version of RE1 we've seen up until this point. Thanks to the GameCube's much more powerful specs, we got higher quality textures, improved character models, better audio, the whole 9 yards. To say the development team outdid themselves here would be an understatement. The fact that these visuals have held up nicely over the past 2 decades says a lot. The character models, both human and monster, aren't just sharper, they're more expressive. Animations feel more lifelike, and there's a bunch of small details that go a long way in making it feel real. For instance, now both Chris and Jill will visibly appear more injured when on low health, a feature actually introduced in RE2 that was missing from the original. Item boxes now physically open instead of magically doing so on their own, and characters subtly recoil when firing heavy weapons like the Magnum. And that attention to detail doesn't stop with the character models. The environments themselves have seen a massive overhaul. The mansion itself now feels like a proper decrepit mansion rather than just being a generic spooky backdrop. The lighting, the shadows, and all of the carefully framed camera angles constantly keep you uneasy, like something could be lurking just out of view ready to pounce. And this level of care extends far beyond the mansion, from the courtyard and the guardhouse to the caves and the underground laboratory. Another major upgrade comes in the form of the presentation. Unlike the original, all of Remake's cutscenes are 3D animated using motion capture, with voice acting performed by more professional actors, and it shows.
Hey Wesker, where's Chris?
Jill, no. You don't want to go back out there.
But we've got to find...
What was that?
Chris?
No.
Jill, go and investigate.
I'm going with her. Chris and I go back a long way.
This time around, the story is much easier to take seriously. The tone is more grounded, the performances feel more believable, and the characters no longer come across as unintentionally hilarious. Now, things still aren't perfect by any means, as there's still moments where the original's goofiness still lingers.
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Really?
Now, to be honest, in the grand scheme of things, it isn't really that big of a deal. In fact, I actually find it to be quite endearing. It's a nice little way of making sure that the original spirit isn't completely lost. Other than that, the story in Remake is a more than worthy upgrade that kept me on the edge of my seat wanting more the first time I played. The levels of engagement this time around are twofold, and the same can be said for Remake's overall gameplay. Like the story, the gameplay DNA is similar to that of the original, but this time includes a multitude of new mechanics and quality of life features to make the experience way better than before. One of the first changes you'll notice, especially in the 2015 HD version, is the new addition of control options. The alternate control scheme allows players to ditch tank controls in favor of a more traditional 3D movement style, and this is the scheme I used for both of my playthroughs. Even though I got used to tank controls fairly quickly in the original, this option makes the experience more easier, and is the one I recommend to all newcomers. That said, the original tank controls are still available if you want that authentic PS1 feel. The movement style also adds the quick turn mechanic first introduced in RE3, which proves invaluable when either you need to move quickly or to react fast to threats. At its core though, this is still a classic survival horror game. You're still managing ammo, herbs, ink ribbons, limited inventory space, and solving puzzles to progress further, all while defending yourself from all sorts of hellish creatures. Chris and Jill function largely the same as before, with the only difference being Chris now has a permanent bonus item in the form of the lighter. In the original, the lighter was pretty useless. You can easily beat the entire game without it. This time though, it serves as Chris's equivalent to Jill's lockpick, and its importance has been greatly increased, which is something we'll talk about as well in a bit. The mansion itself has also been greatly expanded, introducing new areas, puzzles, and scenarios for players to partake in. A great example of this is the new cemetery area, which, fun fact, was supposed to be in the PS1 original but was ultimately cut. As an aside, one thing about me you're going to notice going forward in the future is that I'm a huge supporter of video games getting remakes and remasters. The reason being is because, unlike a movie, video games, especially ones made in this early 3D era, were often severely limited by technological and design restraints caused by hardware at the time, which is something movies and other forms of media don't usually have to deal with. But with modern tech, they can finally bring that original vision to life and let the game live up to its full potential. A great example of what I mean by this is how even one of the most basic enemies has been reinvented to be far more terrifying than before in a way you wouldn't expect. While most returning enemies function similarly to how they did in the original game, the remake makes them far more threatening. Because backgrounds are no longer just static images, enemies cannot interact with them too. There are many areas in the game where enemies can either come crashing through windows or open doors to previously peaceful areas, which can take you by surprise, which really reinforces the idea that nowhere is truly safe. On top of that, the standard zombie enemies have been programmed with an extra feature that will make you shit your pants. After killing certain zombies, you'll notice that their bodies don't disappear after a while. You wouldn't know it at first, but they're actually slowly mutating into these things called Crimson Heads. These guys are flat out nasty, and you're going to want to avoid them at all costs, especially on higher difficulties. Not only do they run faster, but they also hit way harder than their regular counterparts, making them hell on earth in certain situations. Thankfully though, it isn't the end of the world, and they can be prevented by either performing a decapitation or by burning their corpse before they transform. This is done by filling a fuel canteen using various bottles of kerosene found around the map alongside the lighter. But even then, caution should be taken, as like everything else, the kerosene itself is in very limited supply, so you must think carefully about which bodies you burn and which ones you risk leaving behind. But the Crimson Heads are not the only new enemy type added, as the other one is hands down one of the saddest and honest to god most fucked up things in the series so far: Lisa Trevor. To give a bit of background, Lisa is the daughter of George Trevor, the architect of the Spencer Mansion. Once upon a time, he made a deal with Oswald E. Spencer, the mansion's owner, to design and build the place, and in return his family would come and stay there once it was finished. What George didn't know was that Spencer was one of the founding members of the Umbrella Corporation, the series' antagonist, and the whole come and stay at the mansion thing was just a setup. Spencer planned to kidnap the entire family and use them as test subjects for Umbrella's twisted experiments. And unfortunately, the only member of the Trevor family to survive was George's only child, Lisa. Lisa ended up being kept alive for years as a test subject because her body was somehow able to withstand all the viruses and mutations, and while it kept her alive, it completely destroyed her humanity in the process. By the time we meet her in the game, she's this tragic, deformed, unstoppable creature, still wandering around clutching her mother's remains, still longing for the day to meet her again. And keep in mind, everything I just explained so far is only scratching the surface. The deeper you go, the more tragic, the more depraved, and more terrifying it gets. And first of all, let's back up for a second and acknowledge for the fact that this company literally experimented on a child. Let that sink in for a second. Getting away from that, in terms of gameplay, when you first meet Lisa, she's definitely a horrific sight, but with careful maneuvering, you can get past her without issue. Just keep in mind, like with everything else, I wouldn't really recommend letting your guard down around her though. Lisa and the zombies are not the only baddies to receive changes, as some boss battles are different here as well. For example, the room that houses Plane 42 now includes a second floor, and the battle against Neptune has been turned into more of a puzzle fight of sorts. Most of the other bosses haven't changed much, just small tweaks here and there to make them play better. But staying on the topic of the battle in the Aqua Arena, the fight against Neptune is definitely the more interesting and well thought of out of the two. It starts off as a race against time, keeping him out of the room by solving a puzzle, and it ends with this incredibly ingenious way of finishing him off that I've always loved. It's definitely better than how it was in the original game, where you just pushed a simple button and that was the end of the encounter. Staying on the topic of combat, most of the weapons from the original are all here and accounted for, but the arsenal has been expanded. The assault shotgun is easily my favorite out of all of them. It hits harder, has better range, and carries an extra shell, making it incredibly effective, especially when playing as Chris, since he doesn't gain access to a lot of heavy firepower like Jill. Then there's the self-defense pistol, which is supposed to be a use only in an emergency type weapon, as it has a huge damage output. The catch is that it only has one bullet left in its chamber, and after it's been fired once, that's it. There's no more ammo drops for it anywhere in the game. Now, it's not necessarily a bad inclusion. If you're ever in a situation where you need a lift, it's there. But for me, I've just always kind of forgotten about this thing, or just used it randomly without a second thought. Thankfully, the other new weapon system introduced here fares way better. Defensive items are tools you can equip that allow you to break free of an enemy's grasp before it damages you. There are 3 types. Daggers can be used by both Chris and Jill, allowing you to stab your attacker, though it doesn't always outright kill them. Jill has access to battery packs for her stun gun, which can shock enemies and sometimes finish them off. Chris gets flash grenades, which can be shoved into an enemy's mouth and explode after a delay, often decapitating them. You can even shoot the grenade to detonate it instantly, though splash damage makes positioning important. Overall, the combat in Remake is simply more fun to engage with. It feels smoother, more responsive, and more forgiving, but never to the point where it loses its edge. The tension remains. You still have to think carefully, but moment to moment, it's more satisfying to navigate around the mansion and deal with whatever is waiting around the corner. Another area where the remake surpasses the original is in its map system. It clearly marks points of interest like safe rooms, so which rooms are still locked, and indicates whether a room has been fully explored or not. These features make it nearly impossible to get truly lost, allowing players to use simple process of elimination to determine where to go next. progression is a lot more streamlined and intuitive without ever feeling like the game has to hold your hand. Wrapping up the gameplay section, like all other ports that came before it, Remake features a myriad of game modes and bonuses to entice players to keep coming back. One thing I forgot to mention when it comes to the original versions is that there's other unlockables besides new outfits. If you beat the game in under 3 hours, you unlock a rocket launcher with infinite ammo, and on the PC version, if you beat the game with the same criteria, Chris will gain a very rare machine gun called the Mini-Me. The remake follows the same formula, with the only change being if you beat the game in under 5 hours, you get the Samurai Edge, which without a doubt takes the cake for the best weapon in the game, period. Not only does it do an insane amount of damage, it also greatly increases your chance to get a headshot on the first draw. Furthermore, it also uses the handgun ammo, making it incredibly OP, and a nice trophy for those who go the distance. Then of course we have all the alternative outfits that can be unlocked. This time around we have stuff like Sarah Connor Jill, RE3 Jill, Chris's The Mexican outfit, which is a reference to a Brad Pitt movie of the same name, and finally Chris's outfit from Code Veronica. And like before, when Chris switches costumes, Rebecca will have a new one on as well. All very nice stuff, but for me, nothing will ever beat that iconic STARS look.
Perfection.
In addition, we got some new game modes added here, the first of which being One Dangerous Zombie. This mode unlocks after you complete the game on either normal or hard difficulty with both characters. Once unlocked, starting a new game will trigger a special message describing the arrival of a far more dangerous zombie variant. The zombie in question here is actually Bravo team member Forrest Spire. This time, instead of being confined to the crow balcony, he's now roaming around the mansion and will give chase whenever he sees you. The game otherwise continues as normal. There are still the usual enemies to deal with, but now on top of everything else, you have to worry about him being on your case as well. Making matters even worse is that Forrest is far more dangerous than any other enemy in this game mode. The reason being is because he now has a bunch of grenades strapped to his chest, and if you try to engage him in any way, it's an instant death.
Skip it up and down.
The only way to survive is to try and avoid him at all costs, which is easier said than done considering he can easily catch you off guard because he runs just as fast as a Crimson Head. I've found that there are two major strategies that can help you beat this mode. First is keep an ear out for the sound of his grenades clanking. It's an instant giveaway that he's nearby. Secondly, always try to remain at full health. Reason why is because if he manages to grab you, your best option is to just let him damage you and create space rather than trying to fight back, as even using defensive items is off the table. Thankfully, once Plan 42 is defeated, he'll no longer spawn in the mansion and the threat will have finally passed. This is a very unique gameplay twist, pretty much putting your dodging, running, listening, and health management skills to the test in order to stay alive. Be warned though, after this mode is unlocked, the only way to turn it off is to completely start a new save file from scratch and delete your old ones, as reusing old saves will trigger it again. Next up is Real Survivor mode. This mode is pretty much identical to hard mode in its difficulty, but has two major differences. First is that all the item boxes are no longer linked together, meaning that if you want to go back and get an item you dropped in a certain chest, you have to go back to that specific chest, and auto aim has been disabled. So if you like RE and really want to push your limits, then this is the mode for you. But here's the thing, that's still not even the most difficult mode this game has to offer. That award goes to, and I'm not kidding here, Invisible Enemy mode. Here's how it works. As the name suggests, for the entirety of the game's runtime, all enemies, including bosses, are completely invisible, and on top of that, auto aim has once again been disabled. First off, the level of masochism here is extreme. The only real saving graces are that you can still choose the difficulty, and that enemies can be seen in stuff like reflective surfaces. But even then, the sheer amount of nerves required to get through this mode is insane. You're relying entirely on sound cues, memory, and blind faith that something isn't about to grab you from thin air. Like, speaking off the cuff here, all the players who have completed this, you have my full respect. Seriously, 07's out to all of you. When it comes to ports just like the original, Remake has plenty of options across multiple console generations. Starting with the GameCube version, which is pretty much the standard version, the only things to note is that it uses only tank controls and runs at 480i at a 4:3 aspect ratio. So it definitely feels like a product of its time, but honestly, I had a lot of fun with it, to the point where I was actually kind of addicted to playing it this way. There's something about experiencing it in its original form that just works. I don't think it's a bad version to go back to, at all. The only real hurdle is that physical copies are a bit hit and miss, so for most people today, the best option is through emulation on Dolphin. And to be honest, all the same things can be said for the Wii port released in 2008. It's pretty much a carbon copy of the GameCube version, with the only differences being that the game now only uses one disc, that the picture is now being displayed at 480p, and lastly there's the new controller options. Besides the GameCube controller, you can also use the Wii Remote by itself, the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, and the Wii Pro controller. Sadly, no motion controls here like in RE4, but considering the type of game this is, maybe that's for the best. Last but not least, we have the 2015 HD Remaster, which is easily the most widely available and most complete version of the game. Because of this, most people, yours truly included, recommend this version above all else. It first launched on PS3 and Xbox 360 running at 720p at 30 frames per second, and later made its way to PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch running at 1080p, still running at 30 frames per second. However, it's not a standalone release and is bundled in a collection with Resident Evil 0. Pretty cool, right? The PC version via Steam runs flawlessly on modern hardware, supports up to 1080p at 60 frames per second, and even has full controller support. Moreover, this is the first version of Remake to feature a 16:9 aspect ratio, making it look gorgeous on modern displays. Now in terms of new content, there really isn't much to talk about gameplay wise, but you do get some new bonus outfits based on Chris and Jill's Resident Evil 5 designs, but that's about it. Now I really hope you guys can forgive me again because there's something else I forgot to mention. Thankfully though, it ties into what I was going to say next. One of the most iconic parts of Resident Evil are of course the door opening animations. These now iconic visuals serve two purposes. One is that they're a clever way of hiding loading screens in between areas, and two is that it does a phenomenal job tapping into the human fear of the unknown by making you question what's on the other side. Just one of the many design choices that make this pure masterclass in horror. Now, the reason I bring it up is that the first few times it's incredibly effective in what it sets out to do, but once you start backtracking constantly, particularly on speed heavy playthroughs, it can start to pose a problem. Every single time you enter or exit an area, you gotta stop, open the door, look at the animation, and finally appear on the other side. It really does make the pacing feel like hell and is one of the reasons why the PC version is my favorite version. With mods like Resident Evil Fusion Fix, not only can we get the game to run up to 4K at 120 frames per second, but it also includes the door animation skip mod, which makes the game flow much better. So if all that sounds good, then the PC version is definitely for you. Links for everything will be provided below. These days, whenever a remake or remaster comes out, there always seems to be a debate. People asking things like, why does this even exist? Or should a remake simply exist alongside the original? Or should it outright replace it? Now, I'm usually of the mindset that under most circumstances, they should stand side by side. But Remake is one of those examples where it makes it really hard to make this argument. Like I mentioned earlier, the original isn't a bad game by any means. But like a lot of games from that era, it has shown signs of age. Remake, on the other hand, is a totally different beast altogether. I absolutely adored my time with this game. It is a masterpiece, no other way to describe it. The music is haunting in ways that would genuinely stick with you, the atmosphere is more oppressive in all the right ways, the story is finally being told the way it was meant to be, with believable performances and a presentation that actually sells the situation, the survival horror gameplay isn't reinvented, but simply perfected. And the characters, especially this version of Chris Redfield, is easily one of my favorite characters in the series. He's confident but not untouchable, skilled but still human, and honestly, I'm in love with his design, and it's one I genuinely hope to cosplay someday. And as I said throughout this entire section, it's not just me who holds this game in such high regard. When Resident Evil first released back in 2002, it was met with widespread praise from critics and fans alike, many of whom praised it for how faithfully it brought the original Resident Evil back to life. The only low note worth mentioning is that while Remake was a critical success, it didn't perform as well commercially. Now, this outcome was due to a variety of outside factors, none of which really had anything to do with the game itself. And this is also the reason why Mikami would switch gears come RE4 with a much more action-oriented approach. Despite that initial setback, Resident Evil didn't just fade into obscurity. Quite the opposite. As the game became available to more players through later ports, its reputation only continued to grow. And thanks to the strength of its own design, it's widely now recognized as not just one of the finest remakes ever made, but as one of the greatest games of all time. And I wholeheartedly agree. This is a masterpiece, no doubt about it. And seriously, if you haven't tried it yet, please do, especially if you're a massive horror fan. Like many other Resident Evil entries, it just might change your life. And with that, my time with Resident Evil has come to an end. Looking back at both versions, regardless of which one you prefer, whether it's the PlayStation original or the GameCube remake, it's impossible to deny just how special this game truly was. Not only did it lay the foundation for Resident Evil, but it also helped shape the future of horror gaming as a whole. It's really one of those landmark moments in gaming where once it released, there simply wasn't going back. Its influence can be seen across countless horror titles that followed, even inspiring series that would become iconic rivals in their own right, like Silent Hill. In fact, the sequel to that game, Silent Hill 2, is widely considered to be a magnum opus in its own right, much in the same way that RE4 would become later in the series. But the one thing about Resident Evil and really the series as a whole is just how far it has come. What started nearly 30 years ago with a single mansion incident has grown into one of the most influential horror franchises gaming has ever seen. And what makes that legacy even more impressive is that the series hasn't just been influential in how it has changed the landscape of gaming and entertainment, and it's also how it's remained consistently strong over the years. A big part of that comes down to Capcom's willingness to adapt and evolve with the times. Even if every change didn't always stick the landing, the series has never been afraid to reinvent itself and try something new, and that willingness alone is worthy of commendation. All in all, 30 years later, Resident Evil continues to stand as one of gaming's greatest examples of excellence, and I'm excited to see what the rest of the series, and the future for that matter, have to offer.